Well, the running backs are not happy. So let's talk about running backs in the NFL. If you know one thing about me, you know that I don't like BS arguments. I'd swear, but it's very early into the podcast. I just don't like arguments where I look at it and go, you know what? A lot of the stuff you're saying just isn't applicable to your current position as a running back in the NFL. There's two things working against running backs: reality and evolution. The pass is more valuable. It took the NFL way too long to figure this out. I remember the two things quote. You remember that one? I don't know if that was a Parcells one or not, but it got repeated all the time. It was like only three things can happen on a pass and two of them are bad: incompletion and interception. I never understood it because it was like, well, what would like, so it's a 50% success ratio on runs. But you could argue three things can happen on a run and two of them are bad if you throw a fumble in there, right? I never understood. Look, identity, punch him in the mouth, let him feel you, that kind of stuff, right? But like the first play in an NFL game where the defense, it's their first snap, they're never going to have more energy and they're never going to be more excited. And then you decide to run it right up the middle. It's like, cool, now it's 2nd and 9. So the league always should have been passing more. You should have been putting athletes out in space, and the reward of what a pass attempt could be far outweighs what a rushing attempt could be, despite the understanding of knowing that there should be balance. But that was a quote that a lot of people hung on to for a long time. I don't remember if it was necessarily a Parcells one. Parcells used to have, the record is you are what your record says you are. I don't know. What if my first 8 games are against way tougher opponents than yours and we're both 4-4? I don't buy that one either. I remember there was another rushing stat that never made any sense to me. And they used to actually put this into like research packets, and they'd put graphics up on television, whether it was ESPN, CBS, Fox. And it was like, oh, when this team runs it 22 or more times, they win 78% of their games. And then you start thinking to be like, wait, is it because they're running, or are they running because they're already winning the game? And then we realized, yeah, that's kind of a dumb stat. So let's get rid of that one. We have grown up for decades thinking that you had to run the football late in the season to win a Super Bowl. It's just not true anymore. It's nice. Balance is nice, keeping the defense honest, but it's not a priority, and the running backs are feeling that pain. When I look at the passing evolution of it working its way up from high school, college, and then to the NFL, which is more fun, and I think just better off, your better overall reward math that we've talked about here in a football game, it's a lot like the NBA. I mean, the correlation is very similar to the NBA. They should have been shooting more threes. And I'll admit, there's league pass nights where I'm like, this sucks. I don't want to watch this tonight. It's just a 3-point shooting contest. But it's the best way if there's a talent gap to try to hang in a game, even if I missed some of the stuff that I grew up with. Do I really miss post play? Maybe a little. And I realize that Jokic and Embiid are two of the best players in the league, but Jokic is in his own category of like what he's capable of doing. And Embiid, I still think if your playoff success is based on dumping into a big who's going to have double and triple teams swarming all over himself, and then the ball is going to have to get kicked out to somebody else, like I don't know that you really want to run your team or your offense through the post. Although I've been willing to maybe zag on post positioning, but I have not come to any kind of conclusion on any of this. This is the evolution of sports. I mean, do you remember like we used to have power forwards where he was the other guy on a block? NBA offenses had a center on one block and a power forward on the other block. Can you imagine running 2 different guys in the post in a game today? You just wouldn't do it. I mean, should it make you sad? I don't think it should. Power forwards that can't shoot in today's NBA, you know what they're called? Backup centers. Right? They're not going to let you be out there playing the 4 if you can't shoot. You just don't. Because it's like, look, we need more spacing. We need more shooters because the reward is there. Another thing about the declining importance of fullbacks. Although I'd argue that some of the worst content is preceded by if Kyrie did this, ... and also keep that same energy followed by awful point. But where is the same energy for the fullbacks? Do you know which fullback led the NFL in carries last season? Derek Watt with 9. That tied for 180th for all football players that carried the football. There are only 26 fullbacks under contract, according to some of the salary data that's out there now. You want to know why? Because NFL teams are like, look, it's kind of cool having one of these guys, but we give him like maybe a carry a game. And if he's a great blocker, there's something in there. But a lot of times the defense doesn't have to worry about that guy running out into the flat. Maybe once. How many fullback wheel routes have you watched recently? So the NFL went away from it. The same way the NFL went away from the massive neck roll middle linebacker who couldn't turn and run with anybody. The same way we just don't see like those traditional nose tackles line up over the center for 60 snaps on defense. The game got different. So the other stat, running back argument that I've heard in the past that is supposed to give us sympathy for the position is that the running backs have the shortest careers of any of the positions in the NFL. And yes, that's true. Looking at multiple references, you're going to come up with a career expectancy of just over 2.5 years for running backs. It is the worst on average for any of those positions. Do you want to know what the average length of a wide receiver's career is using the same references? 2.8 years. Nobody says shit about the receivers. Okay, this is about turnover. This is about massive rosters and replenishing it every year with 7 rounds of draft picks on top of all the other supplemental picks that you get. The reason I've never understood the 2.5-year lifespan for the running back, and I remember doing this back in the day on the radio show where I got research involved. I said, we need to dig into this and look at this because that doesn't make any sense to me. I think the running backs that we are aware of play a lot longer than 2.5 years. And we went through it, and it's one of the most misleading things. Or apply it this way, it's misleading for everybody because you're including in all of the draft picks that never even get a chance. Those drag the overall numbers down. If you want to look at just the top 10 running backs, and I just randomly picked 2 years, I could do it for any of the seasons. If you looked at the top 10 running backs from 2010, right? The leaders in rushing yards, the average career length for those top 10 running backs was 9.7 years. Then I picked another year because I've already done this. 2015, top 10 running backs, their average career length was 10.5 years. Now I understand what you're saying, right? Because you're you and you're doing you stuff. But Ryan, you just picked the top 10 running backs. That's kind of the point. The ones that are good play a much longer time than is advertised. You can't be in the league 10 years going, we only play for like 2.5 years. But like, no, that's not true. It's sort of true, but it's very misleading. How come the receivers never say, hey, we only play 2.8 years? Because they're the ones that are still getting paid. Now, if you look at those running back numbers for even the top guys, right, their numbers fall off a cliff. But guess what? So do all the other positions in the NFL, who at the end of their career is like, this guy's still awesome, but we're going to get rid of him. This guy's still awesome. I mean, yes, there are exceptions to some players that are terrific, decide they want to walk away from a very violent game. But the reason that 2.5 years for a career number exists isn't because it's just unfair. It's because of the massive amount of turnover that happens at that position and really every other position. There's just one that needs to be last. I looked at the draft. Let's talk about turnover again. I could have done this for a ton of different draft classes where I could compare the quarterbacks to running backs, but I did 2 classes to make 2 different points. In 2009, there were 11 quarterbacks drafted. The average length of the career for those quarterbacks was 3.45 years. There were 23 running backs drafted in that same class. The average of their careers, 4.39 years. Wait, that's weird. Yeah, it's kind of weird that year's running back class had a longer career. Now, to show my work here, it was tough. It was tough figuring out, do I count that year if he's on IR? Yes, because for every Rhett Bomar, there was a Frank Summers, right? When I was like, wait, the practice squad doesn't count, IR does. Maybe he was on, but doesn't have any stats. For the most part, I think it works itself out. Now, let's challenge myself here a little bit because I wanted to look at another draft class that challenged the premise of this, all right? I wanted to find a quarterback class that actually had a much longer lifespan in the NFL than the running backs did. I found it in 2011. There were 12 quarterbacks drafted. They had an average career length of 6.58 years. All right. There were 29 running backs drafted that year for an average career length of 4.86 years. Actually, both of those classes ended up having careers that were like 2 years longer than the average for the position for everybody that's in the league. But the point is, it's not that quarterback class won the longevity contest. The point is, there were 29 running backs drafted. Almost every team could argue they took a running back that year. That wouldn't happen with quarterbacks, despite the fact that, usually you're still carrying 2. Some of the teams will carry 3. If you look at it, I remember Danny Cannell used to always talk about this when he was trying to hang on in the NFL, and he'd be like, can I just be your third string guy? And then Shanahan took him over, and he's like, look how rarely the third guy ever plays. And a lot of the second guy snaps are a lot lower than you ever imagined. So roster-wise, you still probably have a few more running backs. But if you're taking between 20 and 30 running backs every year in the NFL draft, like they do, the turnover is just going to happen. Now, is the turnover fair? No, not necessarily. I've said this about quarterbacks for a really long time. I feel like the NFL eats their own quarterbacks. They draft a guy in the 4th round. There's a starter in place. The 4th round guy never gets any reps. We have no idea if he could ever really do it or not. There's a pretty good chance if they've seen him taking reps in practice, he's been around the team facility for 2 years, and they decide to draft another quarterback in the 4th round to get rid of him, they at least think they know one guy can't do it. The next guy, they don't know if he can do it, but they don't know that he can't. So he just gets replaced. And then it kind of ruins quarterback depth. When you start looking at the depth charts when the season gets started, you're like, who's that guy? We actually said that about Mike White once. Maybe a guy. But it's the same thing for running backs, but just at a bigger scale. When you're taking this many, there's somebody that was drafted in the 5th round. Doesn't get that many snaps. Probably playing special teams. Not really making that much of an impact. And they're like, you know what? He's 23, he's 24. We don't really think he's that special. We could never imagine giving him 10, 15 carries. We don't really think he's much of a threat in the passing game. So you know what? We'll just draft another one. It's not unfair. It's just the reality of the way business is done. I hate that Saquon Barkley was hit with the franchise tag. Not so much specifically to Barkley, because if you've heard me before, I hate the franchise tag. People have argued, oh, wait, it doesn't actually get used that much. It's not that big of a deal. And if you've heard this before, I apologize. But for the new listeners, it's not that when it's used, it's that it exists. It suppresses true free agency for some of the players. And for Barkley, he doesn't want the tag. And I get it. But if part of your argument is, I want the tag, because I hear this running back argument all the time. And I mentioned it before. Hey, they take a ton of punishment, right? I've got to get my money while I can get it now. If your argument is, I'm probably going to be hurt, so I need to be paid more, that's not a good argument. If I show up to the job site and say, I need to get paid more hourly because I'm going to miss a lot of days to make up for the time lost, that's not going to work. That's not a real negotiation. And it gets thrown around like it's a good point all the time. Hey, these guys get hurt all the time. Take care of them? Not if you're running a business. Now, I don't blame, again, Barkley for being upset about it. I don't like that the tag exists. And sure, he'd probably make more guaranteed money if he were a true free agent. But Dalvin Cook's going to be 28 next month. Where's the interest for that guy? Apparently, he wants like $10 million a year. But those deals are done. They're done. Ezekiel Elliott's deal was terrible. It was terrible when it happened. They ended up paying him $50 million or so for 4 years. It wasn't worth it. Saw a lot of NFL players get involved in the conversation. Maurice Jones-Drew said, if you don't have Mahomes, you need a top running back to win a Super Bowl. Let's discuss that. The last 5 Super Bowl winners, their leading rusher on the season, non-Mahomes. Sony Michel, Rams. Ronald Jones, Tampa Bay. Sony Michel again with the Pats. LeGarrette Blount, Philly. LeGarrette Blount, New England. Not a great point. Derrick Henry got really upset about it. And Derrick Henry's probably the second guy since Adrian Peterson where I've said that feels like one of the only dudes where the offense is about him more so than it is the quarterback. What Peterson did with the Vikings in a couple of those years, those teams weren't that good. I don't know if that'll ever happen again at that position. Henry's probably the closest thing we've had to it. Spare me my running back's really good too for like a year or two. I'm talking about carrying the offense for multiple seasons. I understand why he's upset. It's personal to him. He's a running back. But get rid of the position? just because Saquon Barkley's not going to make Ezekiel Elliott money. Des Bryant tweeted about how kickers' annual salaries is higher than running backs' annual salaries. Now, I don't know if I'll ever be at a point in my life where I feel one way about something and then go, I feel a little different after this Des Bryant meme tweet. But it's a bad point because it completely eliminates the reality of how many more running backs are in the league versus how many kickers are in each roster. Okay? The league isn't paying productive players. The league has realized, and this has been going on for years, you just don't really want to make this investment in that position because the position, what they do, is not as important as what the quarterback does. But it feels like a different topic altogether. I think because we just know who those guys are. I think we can name them. We don't care about all the old line guys that get replaced because they don't have stats, right? Running backs are still cool, right? You're still buying their jerseys. You're still excited when your team drafts one of them. You're keeping track of all this stuff. But I think that's the only reason why it feels like there's this running back problem, because it's still a far more identifiable player than all the other anonymous positions on an NFL roster. I get why the Giants tagged him. I get why Barkley hates it. But not only would I tag him if I were the Giants, I would have never taken him second overall. And I think he's a stud.